radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Good evening. Long day today. We'll get to all of that. This is Fade to Black. It's Wednesday, April 19th, 2023. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. And tonight, we're going to do a full night of Bigfoot and the science of Bigfoot encounters with Dr. Simeon Hein. And here's the deal. Dr. Hein is a former university professor in statistics and research methods. He came across the idea of remote viewing back in 1996, and he took it as a skeptic, as it should be. Since then, and the training and everything else, he had to determine that there is a large scientific knowledge that is being withheld from public discussion. We're going to be talking about all of this tonight. He established a nonprofit institute for residents and began teaching remote viewing classes in Boulder, Colorado. Continues to teach online. He also became interested in all those other topics that come along for the ride. Crop circles, unexplained aerial phenomena, UAPs, UFOs, and extraterrestrials. Tonight, it is Bigfoot. His website is mountbaldy.com, and I would like to welcome, very excited about tonight's show, for the first time, Dr. Simeon Hein. Dr. Hein, good evening. How are you, sir?
Hey, Jimmy. How's it going tonight? Thanks for having me here.
Man, this is going to be a great night. But before we get started, you get the first-time guest disclaimer. So let's get that out of the way, which is, Dr. Hein, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where it starts, it starts. Where it ends, but we're going to end as friends. There you go. That's a 10-year-old tradition on this show. The next time you're not going to get it, but tonight you have to accept.
I think your disclaimer for me should be warning. You may be distracted by Jimmy's guitars and feel the urge to play.
I'm distracted by your puppy back there who seems
Astro.
to be behaving. Yeah, Astro.
He's doing a good job. He's doing a good job.
7-month-old puppy rescue. I love that, man. I love that.
From the Gallup area. Yeah.
Yeah, my 3 dogs that I don't have anymore, they're with my ex, all rescues. And, and that's just the way to go. It's just the way to go. So before we jump into Bigfoot, did you get a chance to watch the UFO hearing in the Senate this morning? Did you watch that?
I'm afraid so. Every minute of it. I wanted something a little tougher from Gillibrand.
Yeah. Interesting comment. That was kind of my takeaway too. I was expecting her. She was great. I'm not, but I thought there was going to be a little more meat on that bone.
Exactly. Even the Hill.com had yesterday 10 questions that they should ask Dr. Kirkpatrick. And they didn't. They didn't really push it. And, there's just a lot more evidence out there. It made me think of this well-known phrase, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so if you keep narrowing what you consider to be real data, you're just going to end up with very limited types of sensor systems that our military has access to and so forth. Plus, people have pointed out that he only has, Tim McMillan on Twitter today said that Kirkpatrick only has access to 20% of the data.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that tweet. I saw that tweet, and Tim is very studious. Right. And he's very cautious with his tweets. So when they come out, I mean, he's how do I say that? He's like the detective that you don't want on your scent. That's Tim McMillan. And so when he tweets something out, there's a lot of thought behind it, and he just doesn't tweet to tweet. So I did catch that comment. Here's my take, and I agree with your assessment. Gillibrand had a gift given to her 2 weeks ago when Sean Kirkpatrick and Avi Loeb wrote that op-ed piece about the possibility of alien motherships in our solar system dropping off probes, and that could be what we are experiencing here right now on planet Earth. And all Gillibrand had to do when he said today, I'm paraphrasing, no ET, no extraterrestrials in the data, right? And he did this arm motion, right, when he said that. Gillibrand, at that moment, well, can I ask you about that op-ed that you just wrote with Avi Loeb? Because why would you put your name on the byline of that as a co-author? And then because there's something behind that, what made you go out and publish something like that and then say that there's no data that represents ET? And it was a gift for Gillibrand, and I don't know why she didn't go there.
Yeah, I was really expecting a little more, deep questioning, something that went farther than just the sort of superficial bureaucratic sort of talk that we're used to out of Washington. And she's done a really good job over the past years with this topic, really pushing people to tell us a little bit more, but it didn't happen today. And it just feels, I'm not sure the government is capable of handling this topic. Honestly, I think it may have to come from people like us, citizen scientists, because
like it has traditionally.
Yeah, I mean, because Kirkpatrick, he said these things which were very dismissive of citizen scientists. He made negative comments about social media, blog posts. He said that isn't science. But I mean, if you just look at the history of science in the last century or so, the government funded their own plane development initiative to compete with the Wright brothers. And it was Samuel Piermont Langley, if I got his name correctly, right? The head of the Smithsonian at the time. And they funded him to the tune of $100,000 around 1900, which is a lot of money back then. That would be worth, millions and millions now.
That's big money. That's all the money.
And the Langley flyer, which had to be launched from a houseboat in the Potomac, never flew. But yet the Wright brothers, who were self-funded high school dropouts, who funded their operation building bicycles, were successful. So how could you be just so dismissive of ordinary people and say, well, it has to, the way he was describing it, we have to get these bureaucrats and government scientists to agree. And then it has to be peer reviewed. You hear we said peer reviewed by government agencies. Like it all has to stay within these bureaucracies. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and it's always about the funding, and in today's funding environment, it's a tough world. I get that. Yep. But if that was part of the focus of the hearing today, I think Kirkpatrick kind of dropped the ball. When Senator Ernst, when she came at him and said, are you kind of redundant? Right? Are there other agencies doing this work? And a very good question. And his answer, another gift, right? That was a softball tossed to him. All he had to say is, look, we're looking at this stuff, but what if we find the one thing that points to something off planet? It makes everything worthwhile. And that's what Arrow is here to do. Right. That's all he had to say. Funding will come your way. He kind of dropped the ball a little bit.
He used this acronym, some SOP. We want to make this someone else's problem.
Yeah, SCP. Yeah.
Yeah, SCP. Like, let's just kick the can down the road. everyone who studied this subject, and you're well aware of this, Project Sign, the engineers at Wright-Patterson who looked at the Roswell wreckage wrote a report that said they thought this was extraterrestrial way back 1947, 1948, right? And the report was burned. We don't have any copies of that. It was destroyed. So even within the history of the military, you had people who believed it was extraterrestrial. How can you just say nowadays, well, there's just no evidence, when we've had people all along, Roscoe, Hill, and Cutter, and all sorts of people from government agencies breaking ranks and saying, this has to be something off planet.
And I'll tell you the facts of the case. Kirkpatrick hasn't seen anything for himself. He hasn't had that paradigm shift. You know, the daylight, daytime object in the sky that you see, you know, the Holy Grail with your own eyeballs. He hasn't seen that. And I've seen stuff like you and others. I've seen stuff where I don't know what it was, but it wasn't us, right? I can't definitively say what it was, but when you see something like that, you know clearly that it's not us. And that's what drives me to go and find answers. He hasn't had that paradigm shift yet.
Yeah, and even if he had, he's sticking to the company line.
He is.
I'm not saying he's a bad guy. Not at all. I think he's doing what he believes his job is to do, which is to keep narrowing down the explanation until we can discount anything that's off planet, or what's called nowadays NHI, non-human intelligence.
Right.
But the only way you can do that is by not looking at the evidence, because there's so much of it. Even again, I attended the citizen hearing in 2013 at the National Press Club, and that was 5 days of testimony from people who had served as missile control launch officers, 4 of them, and they said this is not our stuff and it's not foreign adversaries. They can't do that, and it took our missiles offline. People like that, people from the FAA, people from the military, people from foreign militaries, people from the Rendlesham Forest Group, a group of Roswell witnesses. You just had really good quality witnesses for 5 days. I can't see how you can say there's just no evidence that any of this is non-ordinary. It doesn't make sense to say that.
And then there was one other part, and then this is a Bigfoot night, so we'll swing off of this, or we can talk guitar for the rest of the show too as well. Is this Gillibrand was again given another gift when he said, "We've interviewed over 24 witnesses." Right there, you stop the hearing. Oh, like who? What did they say? Right? And it was, they just let it go. I don't understand that. I want to know who those 24 witnesses were and why Gillibrand sent those witnesses to Arrow for an investigation. I don't get that. They just let it go.
Yeah, and I've spoken to witnesses who've told me point blank, engineers, top-notch engineers, who told me they've handled this material and they're 100% convinced it's non-terrestrial. It's not made like materials that we see on Earth. It's a whole different type of technology. I've talked to 3 of these people so far, and none of them really want to say very much, except that their group analyzed it and they concluded it wasn't something from here. So where are those people? And these are really high-level people that everyone would know if they came forward. So, who are these witnesses? But, I think there's another aspect to it. Wasn't there a closed hearing in the afternoon, just like we had a year ago? So we don't know what's going on there. The good stuff apparently last year happened in the afternoon, but the public, again, didn't hear it.
Nope. And this one, it's Arrow. I guess we needed an explanation of their operation, which he laid out pretty clearly. And if that was the goal, which was to check in on Arrow and see if they needed anything, and you saw and heard, Gillibrand, okay, we'll write that letter for you. We'll take care of this. Is there anything else that you need from us? Okay, I get all of that. But the two videos that he showed, yeah, actually pretty interesting. Both of them. I think that Mosul video was a metallic balloon of some kind. He said that they'll never be able to identify what that was. But the other one where they revealed with the FLIR imaging the tail of the aircraft, that was pretty cool. Yeah, I appreciated that. It was pretty good. Pretty good. A lot better than the last hearing with that video snafu that they did, for sure. One last thing on where we are today with UFOs and UAPs. It is pretty extraordinary that we would have two hearings in a year on this subject on Capitol Hill. Do you feel the tide changing on this? Is this something that is, disclosure and the big D is, are we getting closer? Is there something tangible out there now that you can kind of feel?
I think we're getting closer. I think this is just the beginning of it, because the witnesses I've talked to who've worked within military, intelligence communities, they must be having the same reaction that we are, and they know what's going on with this. And I would imagine they feel some sense of frustration that we're really not getting the type of accountability that we expect from our government.
Yeah, no doubt.
And there's thousands of witnesses out there. It's obvious there are thousands. We've only heard from the tip of the iceberg. And at some point, I just think it's going to be like, it's like the dam. You just have to remove one brick from the dam for the whole thing to start flowing and eventually collapse. I think some of these witnesses will eventually say, look, this is just not the way we do things here in the United States. We have to tell the truth. Right. And I think that the truth will win out in this case, even though we didn't really see evidence of that today. But look, the Berlin Wall fell down a lot faster than anyone thought in 1989. I was working over there in Austria the year it started, and you could see the beginnings of it, but no one expected it to crumble that quickly. So these things can really take on a momentum that we don't see in the beginning.
Yeah, you're right about that. It was like one day there was talk, right? And the next day they were pulling that thing. I mean, you remember that? Sledgehammers.
Yeah.
That was just crazy. All right, let's get to Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where to start, but I kind of want to say this. I used to be on the fence when it came to Bigfoot. And so I always approached it as objectively as I could and can. But here's the thing. I believe that the Patterson-Gimlin film is authentic. Okay? And if ufology had a UFO video like the Patterson-Gimlin film, it would be case closed. But it's not, right? Bigfoot is not case closed. And I'm starting to think that there is something more paranormal going on, something more supernatural that may be going on. And that's where I sit today. But I just don't have those answers. But I want to go squatching. So this is my opening question. I go squatching, and I'm by myself. Okay? All right? I'm camping. I'm in the woods. It's at night. And I see something. What do you think would be typical of a Bigfoot encounter in that kind of scenario?
Well, typically before you see something, you hear something or you feel something. And this is what I've seen investigating this subject for a couple of years now, is you get these premonitions that something's not right or something's different. You may even have some of these phenomena show up that we typically associate with UFOs or other paranormal phenomena ahead of the Bigfoot encounter, like orbs and such. But typically witnesses, and this doesn't, there's so many variations in these types of contact. They hear sounds, they hear wood knocking sounds, they hear strange howls. There's smells.
Look at this comment.
Sandwiches, yes, you may find your food disappearing. It's things like this. Now, here's the thing. We're very good at rationalizing, and friends I have and other witnesses, and I've got to know a lot of people like this, being in the, the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. It's very easy for your mind to rationalize it as being just an odd sounding coyote, maybe a bigger coyote than you're used to hearing. Or you say, that weird feeling I'm getting, maybe I'm just not feeling well or something. You'll rationalize, or I'm worried about something that happened earlier in the day as I was leaving. But typically what happens is it's a premonition of an encounter before they show up at your tent or wherever you happen to be. And there's so many variations in these types of encounters, Jimmy, that there's no way to generalize it. We're even attempting to do that here. Some of them seem very beneficial, harmonious, cooperative, and some of them seem hostile, and everything in between.
So now let's change this scenario just a little bit. It's you and I sitting there squatching. Okay. And there's a moment where you're going to go, oh, right. Okay. There's going to be that moment. What do you think that would be for you that you would notice first, where you're going to go, Jimmy, hold on. Would it be something internal? Would it be consciousness alerting or something else? Smell?
Yeah, well, people sometimes report this mind speak in their minds.
Right.
Some people like Carter Bouchard have referred to it as psychic nudging. It's something that attempts a type of mind control, even before you're aware of it. That's what makes it such a strange topic. I used to think, probably like you, maybe because I listened to a lot of Art Bell's interviews with people like Lauren Coleman, that this was just some sort of relic primate, a very rare ape, but still a normal mammal, but just rare. But that's not what it turned out to be at all. Not from the research I've seen in the last 20 years. It's a lot stranger than that. You could hear something talking in your mind, attempting to get you to come out of your tent or your camper. It might be just a feeling to change directions on the trail if you're hiking. And it might even turn into lost time, missing time. You might not even know what happened. In other words, you and I might be in the tent and all of a sudden it's 5 hours later. Right. And all we heard were some howls and we saw something out there. All of a sudden it's 5 hours later. Could be like that, or maybe not. Or maybe they moved your whole tent. That's how you know something happened. There's reports of that too, where people say they took them out of danger during snowstorms, things like that.
Now you're suggesting something possibly interdimensional.
Yes, definitely. This does not fit any categories we're used to. And the reason I think it relates to what you and I were just talking about a few minutes ago, it has a lot of parallels to UFO witness encounters, including missing time, cameras and batteries, instrument failure, and just other strange effects, strange luminosities, orbs, and things. Now, this is not every single encounter. I know there are people out there that can be saying, no, Simeon, there are flesh and blood encounters where it does seem like you encountered just a human primate, whatever you think it is. But there are many other encounters where you get these other phenomena happening, just like in UFO encounters. You probably know of Stan Gordon, who's written about this in Pennsylvania and his research on cryptids. And when I first met Stan at one of these conferences in 2002, the UFO Crash Retrieval Conference in Vegas, and he was invited to talk about Bigfoot UFO encounters, where at the same time, I don't think my mind could handle that. For the longest time, I would pick up his book, Silent Invasion, and then I would read a couple pages and put it down. I couldn't understand why you would have Bigfoot and UFOs in the same fields at the same time, in the same vicinities. But if you see them as being some sort of interdimensional phenomena, something that's coming through from parallel realities, it kind of makes sense. Is once you open that doorway, lots of stuff can come through.
Yeah, you're right about that. There are a large majority of Bigfoot researchers that don't want to discuss UFOs. That's you guys. We're talking about Bigfoot here, and they don't want, but I think there is a growing segment of those researchers that are starting to open up to the possibility of a direct connection here. One of the reasons why I'm okay with that, which goes back to the interdimensional aspect of this, and the similarities with UFOs, which is Bigfoot seems to appear and disappear. And that, just like things appearing in the sky and disappearing in the sky, whether it's a parallel world, it's interdimensional, there's a portal opening, some vortex, I don't know. But the descriptions of these eyewitness encounters are very, very similar.
Very similar. There are these patterns. And Jimmy, that's what really got me really hooked into the topic, was if you started reading the encounter stories, talking to witnesses yourself. And a lot of these people, though, I got to know about the subject who took my RV classes here in Boulder. These are Colorado natives. Many of them had had Bigfoot Sasquatch encounters in the Rockies over the years. And it was like a cumulative effect. I think it's just like many of us, you have to hear something a number of times. It could take decades, like it did in my case, for it to really sink into our thick skulls that this is real, that people are experiencing this. Because there's a part of you that wants to go back to the story that you learned in high school and college, which is that these things are a type of folklore. You know, they don't really exist. People are seeing things. That part of your mind keeps rationalizing it until you keep encountering the witnesses and you go, wait a minute. They're all, just like you said, they're all describing the same thing. And some of them describe this sort of mental confusion they feel around their Sasquatch encounters, time loss. Another bizarre aspect of it is groups of witnesses won't describe the same creature the same way. I mean, not even close. They'll describe it. One will say it was like a huge primate. Others will say it looked more like a cat on two legs. Some will say it looked more like a caveman, and they can't even agree what they saw. So there's a lot of similarities. And don't forget the glowing eyes that emit light. We're not talking about eye reflection here. We're talking about eye shine, literally glowing eyes that emit light onto the forest trail, all the colors of the rainbow. And it's just the same thing from one witness to another with variations. So yeah, there's the flesh and blood interpretation. But I think those researchers are so concerned about being accepted by mainstream society. For whatever reason, they want to be accepted. And that's not usually the best way to go in science. You're maybe not going to be popular for quite a long time, if ever. You just have to accept it. But there's so many other cases where the people said they went invisible. They turned into something that looked like saran wrap, which you can see in the David Paulides Missing 411, The Hunted documentary. And well, a lot of people have described that. So what is that? What is that?
Well, help me understand what that may be. Is that if interdimensional is a word that I think even I use too freely. It's an easy word to use when you're trying to describe something that is undescribable. So you just say interdimensional. But when we use that kind of term, invisible, we'll circle back to that. But what is an interdimensional creature? Where are they coming from? What is the science behind that?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I often think of the same thing. These types of life could become invisible without literally being interdimensional. We already have animals on the planet that are very good at doing that, right? Octopus and cuttlefish and types of life that can blend into their background in a second, in a millisecond. Chameleons, right. And we also have animals like the pistol shrimp that can stun its prey with sound, cavitation, sound that's so forceful beyond your Frankenstrat back there, beyond what Eddie Van Halen could do with that it can actually create pressure that can render you unconscious or injure you. So if we already have known animals that we accept can do that, it's not much of a stretch that there's probably other types of life that really got good at doing that, and we can't even see them anymore. In fact, they found it to their advantage to develop this type of invisibility. But having said that, it seems to me that these Bigfoot and other types of cryptids that we don't really have very good names for do seem to really vanish from an area entirely, or because the way they can move around a campsite or in the forest, people describe it as looking like the Roadrunner on one of those Bugs Bunny cartoons that you and I used to watch as a kid. It's moving so fast, it looks like a blur. To me, that represents an entirely different type of physics. I think we have some idea of what that is, but that is something that is going beyond the norm in quite a big way. The gliding, the floating over an area, and that rapid movement. People say it's like it didn't move in the intervening space, whether it be a Bigfoot or what's called Dogman. It seemed to jump from here to there, and just almost be like a blur in between, like almost like in a different frame of reference, the way Einstein would have thought about it. It's a different type of space-time. I think we're dealing with creatures that are made of a different type of matter than we're used to in ordinary reality. They've just pushed it to the extreme where they're going into another Einsteinian frame of reference with a different speed of light and a different time scale. And this is why people experience this type of confusion. It's so hard to talk about this because the more intense the experience, the harder it is to talk about, and the less believable it seems, because the rest of us, it's hard to imagine what that person experienced. And of course, people do not like the stigma and the ridicule that comes along with talking about this subject, being laughed at by their neighbors in their neighborhood or something like this. So we have a lot of people out there who've experienced this who are not talking about it, just like the UFO topic.
Yeah, and you're right about the time scale aspect to this, which is something that isn't discussed enough. I have heard a couple of physicists bring this up when, discussing the possibility of life out there in the universe, and the universe may be full of it all over the place, but it's just not living in our time reference. So we have That was a sneeze. Hold on.
Are you okay there? Yes.
Real. Did I hit the cough button fast enough?
You did.
Man,
you did.
That was loud. That was a real one. That was a bomb. Living in a different time scale.
Yeah.
So we have difficulty, if not an impossible situation, of seeing these things and detecting them because they just don't live in our time reference. So you're right. We're seeing every other frame, and we're getting lucky with that.
Exactly. I think it's very hard for a lot of people to think that way, but this is part of our physics already. This isn't even a new physics. And we're not even talking about even that level. Jimmy is not talking about parallel realities, many worlds interpretation. Hugh Everett at Princeton in 1957 developed what became to be called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. But even before we go there, just in our sort of ordinary reality, we can accept the idea that what seem to be constants could be variables to other types of life, which would make them look blurry. And, Tom DeLonge, to his credit, had a tweet about that a year ago. He said, maybe Bigfoot looks blurry because Bigfoot is blurry. I think that's actually correct. You're dealing with different constructs of space and time. In physics, it's called permittivity, which is the electrical constant of free space, and permeability, the magnetic constant. Well, maybe they're not constant for all different types of life. And we know that if those started to vary, it would short out cameras and batteries, cause different senses of time, and make things look inherently blurry. Things that have variations in permittivity and permeability, just almost like a frequency, to us would look blurry.
Yeah, well, it said, I study this subject, not Bigfoot, the science behind this. And I do my best to understand the science behind it. But here's the thing. Time here on Earth And the frequencies that we see things in light, the frequencies of things that we hear are on Earth. That's our time. This is 24 hours and the rotation of the Earth and the magnetic and the gravity behind that and the rotation around the sun and hour a year. All of that's what we understand, and that's the frequency that we live in. But time is bent backwards and forwards throughout not only our solar system, but throughout the galaxy and the Milky Way and throughout the universe. Time is different everywhere. It's not the same.
Right. We have and this is actually what I wrote my dissertation about in graduate school. It's about how time had become mechanized and put into this linear idea until we started to believe that it literally was linear when we know it isn't, right? It could be variable. And this is what we know from the special theory of relativity from Einstein all the way back in 1905, is that time can speed up, it can slow down based on your frame of reference. Einstein himself proposed a variable speed of light in 1907 and again in 1911. But the idea didn't gain traction because people had already had in their mind from his previous work that it was fixed at this particular speed that we're all familiar with, right?
Well,
but he proposed it could vary based on gravity. And if that's what we're dealing with here, there could be life forms based on these types of variations in, gravity, time, and so forth. And they wouldn't look like we would expect ordinary mammals to look like, which is why when you go to the zoo, you don't normally have your batteries and cameras failing. But witnesses have told me this is what happened to them around Bigfoot.
The part with that with Einstein, when he said, because okay, look, I'm not a physicist, but I play one on TV. Okay, so let me say this: you can't have math work in physics if everybody's got a different speed of light number that they're plugging into their algorithms. So they had to have a standard, right? So everybody's math would work. It wouldn't work if everybody had, speed of light is, I'm going to use this reference from this side of the universe. It's a little faster. It's a little slower. Then the math goes off, right? But Einstein understood that. They argued and argued and argued. They came up with one number, and that's the speed of light. That's it. It's fixed. And that's the number that we use in all of the math. And I get why they did that. But they also know time is different everywhere. That's it. That's it. And we're going to see things differently. There isn't another way to look at it.
Right. And that is a little too much for our tiny brains to handle. We just do not. We want to do what, like the Arrow presentation today in the front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. We want it all to fit in these little boxes to be able to check them off and let go of it and say it's someone else's problem. The thing is, it's probably a lot more complex than we were taught. And to me, Jimmy, all of these topics we call paranormal, this is evidence that it's working in a more complex way than we were taught in grade school or high school, and that we haven't completely applied physics to the way reality works. Because I think if you do, you end up with this idea that there can be other types of energy and information that is not on a linear track. It doesn't have a metric. In fact, we have a name for things like that. We call it fractal geometry, the way nature designs trees and mountains and clouds, not according to lines, but self-similar patterns. So we know that there can also be fractal types of time. Let me give you an example. In our own bodies, our hearts do not beat in this regular, even way like we would imagine they do. They have a lot of variation because the heart, the whole cardiovascular system, has to continually adapt to our environment. So it looks like a fractal, the signature of the heartbeat. The minute looks like the hour, looks like a few seconds. It's all the same sort of variation, but it never fits to a line. And that is very hard for us to accept coming from our Western background, our mechanistic way of looking at it that we got from Newton and the Cartesian perspective, which wants to break it up into even little boxes. So my idea is in between those even little boxes, there's lots of types of life that learned lots of things to adapt to the way nature really works. And we're the ones in this box. We're in the arrow box. We want it to make sense. We want it to check the boxes, go home at the end of the day. It doesn't. It doesn't quite make sense the way we think it should. I think it has its own logic, but at the end of the day, you have to go on the evidence. The evidence is what the witnesses are telling you. For too long, we've been discounting these people. We've just been finding counter explanations, ways to discredit them and diminish the importance of what they tell us they've seen, because it doesn't fit into this linear line. Let me tell you, as someone that has taught statistics, I was taught in graduate school that you throw out the outliers that don't fit the line. You throw out the UAP. Why? They don't fit your linear regression line. Nowadays, throwing out outliers would be seen like racism or something. You're throwing out the things that don't fit your preconceived ideas of the way reality should look. Right. And I think that's totally skewed our scientific perspective, the regression line.
Yeah, yeah. If it doesn't fit, you got your blinders on, right? And if it's going to distort, not only, I hate saying belief system because that always sounds so religious to me, but if it's going to alter your theories, your measurements, your laboratory setting, or your day-to-day life, if it alters that, no, you're going to throw that out. We got to back up for a second.
Yes.
If something is interdimensional, and I'm speaking specifically about Bigfoot, we call him Bigfoot because he leaves really big footprints. Right? Okay. All right. And I've seen them. You've seen them. When you go from interdimensional to dimensional and into the physical enough to leave the footprint, what is happening in that transition?
What must be happening is that these creatures or humans, whatever you believe these are, there's a big debate whether they're more on the primate side or the Native Americans believed they were a type of human. Some of the tribes in the Northwest even said they traded with them going back a couple hundred years. But whatever you think they are, they seem to have the ability to modulate their frequency, just like a musical instrument. And that frequency could go higher and higher till it actually doesn't interact with physical matter. Because matter at its heart, and now we're going to shift to quantum mechanics. What are we told matter is? It's basically frequency. Every physical thing is actually a vibration. It has a certain frequency to it, which is derived from something called the Planck's constant, the smallest unit of action that we can measure. It's a really small amount. The time it takes light to go across a nucleus of an atom or something. It's a very small amount of time.
I heard Brian.
But the frequencies change. Yeah.
I heard Brian Greene describe the Planck scale once, and it blew my mind. He said it is so small that if you blew up the Planck scale to the size of the universe, okay, all right, it would be the size of an apple tree. And I was just like, what, digest. That's how small the Planck scale is. That's like incredible to me.
Tiny, yeah.
It's really that tiny. And I guess that reference would also go back to string theory too, as well, as far as vibration goes and mass coming from something.
Right. And Jimmy, people in physics, well-known physicists, Nobel Prize winners, people like Paul Dirac, who proposed the idea of antimatter, and what in 1930 or so, before the particles were discovered a couple of years later in cosmic background radiation, the positron, people laughed at Dirac, the idea of an antimatter universe. But he said it had to come out of the equations of quantum mechanics. And yet a couple of years later, they find the positron, the antimatter particle to the electron. He proposed some of these ideas that there could be alternate universes, particles that would be exact opposite charge. And yet at the time, no one could quite accept it. So even within quantum mechanics, you have these interpretations that allow for the existence of other realities. And people nowadays are looking at this. Maybe some of the particles in our universe spend some of their time in other realities and then come back. So here's the thing about frequency and Planck's constant. The reality that you and I are perceiving around us right now I know it looks continuous. It looks like it's really there. But that could just be a beat of a certain frequency. To other life forms, it could seem really slow, like a really low bass note compared to a treble note.
Right.
And they're moving just like a good lead guitarist moves in between those very regular bass notes. They're moving in between our reality because they're at a faster frequency. In our frame of reference, this all looks continuous. It's very convincing as a solid structure. But to them, it might look like just an etheric substance they can easily move through, in and around. And I think that's what Bigfoot and other cryptids are doing based on what the witnesses tell us that they're seeing and experiencing. It just fits what they're telling us they experience. If we stop discounting them and saying these are just weird people, these are ice crystals or weather balloons, that equivalent type argument, it was a misidentifications of Venus or ridiculous explanations like we've heard the whole time. The same explanations have been applied to these cryptids. People, the law enforcement, park rangers will always say you saw a bear. Or if it's dogmen, they say, well, you saw a pack of wolves or something, or wild dogs, and you've been traumatized, so you're imagining. I don't think that's true. Just like you said earlier in the show, the reports are too consistent. And that, I think, is very challenging for our ego mind to accept that there's life right outside your door that's probably a lot better at some things than you are, and they can stay hidden if they want to. That's something that's a tall order for many of us to accept. Even for myself, it took a long time to realize when you go out there, there can be things that see you, but you can't see them.
Yeah, and when these two realities, these two frequencies, they cross, and for a moment in time, they are visible to each other.
Yeah,
and we see Bigfoot, we jump. Does Bigfoot do the same thing? Are they just as startled and surprised to see us in their reality?
Yeah, there do seem to be times when they're surprised by people. That's when you can sometimes get a kind of a hostile reaction if they don't want you around and they didn't see you showing up. You've had these people who said they were about to take a picture of them and the lens fell off, made a clunking sound. And even though those creatures could have been a half mile away, they suddenly turned and start coming in your direction. And all of a sudden they're running in your direction. And some of those people, what they describe is losing consciousness, just experiencing a level of fright that they couldn't imagine was possible. I think you can surprise them, but more often it's the other way around. They saw you there and you didn't see them. And they often travel in groups. And sometimes the ones that come close to you are just possibly distracting you. I'm just generalizing here because there's so many types of encounters. You're familiar with Ron Moorhead, right? The Sierra Sounds.
Yep.
So when I interviewed Ron on my YouTube channel, he said even though they could hear them on the other side of the wall arguing they have a language. It sounds, some people call it like reverse samurai. It's like a very staccato, percussive sort of Asian sounding language.
Sounded like John Belushi on Saturday Night Live. You remember the samurai dude? And he would go into that. That's what that sounded like to me.
So Ron Moorhead said they would peek their head out of their structure. You never would see them. It was like they were invisible. They could hear them they had the mics in the walls. They were right there. They didn't cast shadows on the hunting structure, even though the sun was behind them. They couldn't see them. Just a huge amount of variation in the experience. It's almost like, and Ron said in 9 visits up there to the High Sierras, he only saw one once at a distance, way in the distance, just going the other direction. So it seems more often, to answer your question, they're well aware of you, but if you're probably not aware that they're there unless they make sounds or want to be known.
Moorhead, I'm glad you interviewed him. He said one thing that really struck home to me. He said he felt like it was two Bigfoot arguing.
Yeah.
Right? That it was conversational. It was a language, and they were arguing. They're probably arguing over Moorhead, as far as I know.
They were having an argument.
Yeah.
Like, who gets to go into the hunting? Ron made a joke about it. Who gets to go in and eat the humans first? And he's kidding because Ron only had, for the most part, peaceful encounters with them. You've heard what he had to say. Sometimes it sounded like they were taking the camp apart, metal hitting metal, things being thrown around, like They'd go out in the morning, everything was fine, nothing had moved. Like, they can generate these sounds in the most interesting ways, metallic sort of. They can imitate any sound that we can make. They can sound like you're a dog or a relative calling for you. They can make you kind of fool you. The Native Americans said that they were ventriloquists. But Ron also mentioned strange looking luminous objects moving through the forest. One looked like a lightsaber from Star Wars. And that tuning fork sound right above the hunch. So this is why these all go together, these phenomena, even if some people would like it to be separate. The people that are in the relic primate category who want this just to be Gigantopithecus blackie.
Right.
There's no evidence that that animal ever came across the Bering Straits. There's no bones or any evidence that that creature is here, but they want it to be that.
And how do we explain that part of it? And not only, the lack of bodies or DNA or bones. I mean, that's obvious, an obvious thing to point out, but it's something that needs to be discussed. But I think there's another step beyond that, which is they've got to be communal. There's got to be a husband and wife and offspring living together. And so where are the communities? Why aren't we coming upon a cave with belongings in it, or a nesting site with 3 or 4 nests and things and some animal bones left over? You know what I mean? A Bigfoot community. We haven't found that.
Yeah, the American Indians talked about groups of them, and if they had peaceful relations, they described them as just another tribe of very tall, hairy giants. And we do have many years of reports going back through the 1800s of skeletons of giants being found throughout the United States, especially in the Southwest. And that could be what we're talking about. There's another possibility based on the witness accounts that I've read, is that the evidence is being destroyed or buried in national parks and so forth, because they just don't want it. The bureaucracy doesn't want to deal with it. They want it to be someone else's problem. They're just burying the evidence, and they don't want to deal with it. Or in other cases, people have described being on archaeological digs, coming across these huge bones and just finding it so frightening they just wanted to leave. So
when I was a kid, I've told the story so many times, but you bring up a great point, so I'm going to share this with you. I was in 5th grade. Okay, so I'm 9 years old, Chicago, and we're going to the Field Museum in Chicago, one of the greatest museums in the world, no doubt about it. And I have the brochure. Teacher hands out the brochures to the class. I got the brochure to the Field Museum. And on the cover of the brochure was the skeleton of, I forget, it was like a 10-foot human. Something, but it was there, and it was on the cover. Man, I can't wait to see the giant skeleton. This is great. So we get to the Field Museum, a month later. I've lost sleep over this. I'm excited. And I'm like, where's the giant skeleton? What are you talking about? The giant skeleton that's on the cover of the brochure. There's no giant skeleton here. And I was so confused. Now, I have gone back as an adult, as a researcher. I can't find a word about that. I can't. And I saw it myself.
You saw it yourself. Right. And we're told a lot of these skeletons went to the Smithsonian over the decades, and yet they claim now they don't have any of them. So I wouldn't be surprised if the evidence is being suppressed. It's very easy to suppress evidence. It's easier than you would think, because the scientific community at large doesn't want their paradigm challenged, and they would have an interest in doing this.
We're going to hit a break in about 5 minutes, and we'll carry over this question. How often do we hear about a UFO sighting and a Bigfoot sighting happening on the same night?
Those reports exist. And again, Stan Gordon, who we're actually going to be talking to tomorrow in my Bigfoot Cryptid Zoom group, we've invited him to talk. He's written about this. And this, again, was one of the biggest challenging types of ideas that I encountered. They even talk about Bigfoot getting out of these craft
Right.
What is going on there? Your mind wants it to be some sort of escaped gorilla. You think of it as being less evolved than we are, but that's just our own mental projection. They're much more than that, and they're more evolved than we are in some ways. And perhaps they're on that same frequency with extraterrestrials or something like that, who's ever in those craft. But no, they are reported together, and this is what Stan Gordon has talked about many times.
Do you are you open to the idea that maybe Bigfoot is completely extraterrestrial and arrived on this planet from another planet, and it's a species that has been doing its thing for millions of years, and it's in a different frequency? They're extraterrestrial, and we're just not meant to see them?
Well, there's always the possibility that life on Earth was brought here from another place, the so-called panspermia idea. And if they were part of that, I could see it that way. But the fact that they're so physically similar to us leads me to believe that they're the indigenous hominoid or hominid, depending how you look at it, and that they evolved in a different direction than we did. We became very technological and mechanistic, and they stayed on a path of working with nature's internal types of energy and systems, a different type of physics, something more along the line of Nikola Tesla. It's part of nature, so they didn't need physical technology. We already see it in lightning and plasmas and orbs and ball lightning. They learned how to develop all of that resonant type of technology, in my view. That's just my opinion. And they went off in a different direction, which gave them the invisibility advantage. We went in the direction of cars and rocket ships and homes and technology. And we consider ourselves to be the more evolved species here, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. That's just our collective ego thinking that we're the best thing on the planet. That might not be true.
Is that why orbs are nearly connected to Bigfoot, like in nearly every sighting?
Right. I mean, I've talked to these witnesses here in Colorado, and they said they've seen Bigfoot emerge from orbs, just like they can sometimes emerge or be seen around UFOs. They see the orbs first, and they see the Bigfoot almost emerge from the orb. People have reported the Bigfoot holding orbs. So this is why I think they're connected. This is a natural type of Tesla technology through sound and resonance. They're able to produce some sort of frequency and sound which can literally generate coherent matter. And this is the basis for orbs and ball lightning and all sorts of paranormal phenomena. And this is why they're so heavily connected to what we call paranormal.
When we come back, I want to talk about ball lightning. Our guest tonight, Dr. Simeon Hein. Simeon, stay right there. We'll be right back after this short break. This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black. Please visit all of our sponsors. We're taking a quick break here. All of the links are below. We'll be right back.
This is Jimmy Church, and I want to introduce you to Life Waves X39 Stem Cell Activation Patch, which has totally transformed my health, my sleep, brain, and my eyes. I no longer need reading glasses. X39 is a true breakthrough in regenerative science. Using light, X39's patented age reversal technology is clinically proven to signal the activation of younger stem cells, accelerating the body's natural healing process. X39 promotes restoration and rejuvenation, bringing the life-changing benefits that I've experienced. By naturally elevating a master signaling peptide in the body, X39 boosts vitality, health and wellness, and resets 4,000 genes to a younger, healthier state. It's one patch, once a day, and you can turn back time with X39. Just go to healingworksnow.com. That's works with an X. healingworksnow.com.
Hey everybody, it's Billy Carson, also known as Forbidden Knowledge. I want to talk to you about a very special event coming up July 30th, 2023. the Forbidden Conscious Awards. We're going to honor people who have been contributing to the conscious community for decades. People that you know and love that have helped you get to higher levels of thought and consciousness and awareness. It's going to be a live in-person event, but seats are going to sell out very fast. You want to make sure you're there in person, and guess what? You can help vote for the winners. Voting is available on forbiddenknowledge.com, and the categories are going to be social media influencer, podcast/radio host, TV host, actor, director, producer, entrepreneurs, health and wellness, philanthropists, authors, field researchers, archaeologists, space anomaly hunters, and of course, a Lifetime Achievement Award. I'll be your keynote speaker that night at the Forbidden Conscious Awards. We have celebrity guests performing. We'll have a halftime show where we're actually going to perform music for you. And don't forget about the pre-event mixer, where if you buy a box seat, you'll be in the VIP section, and you also have private access to a VIP mixer with celebrity guests. Shake hands, break bread, network, and then walk the red carpet with us and take amazing photos. It's gonna be a night to remember. You don't wanna forget this. Make sure you hurry up and get your tickets because they're selling out very fast. I wanna see you there. Forbidden Conscious Awards 2023.
River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com.
All right, welcome back. You've got to check out X39. It's a patch. I just wear it on the base of my neck right here. Stem cell rejuvenation. You look at my face. I've got my eyesight back. I don't wear reading glasses anymore. It's absolutely incredible what that has done for me. So check out X39. I popped it up in the chat. The links are below, and of course over on our website too as well, X39. Our guest tonight, Dr. Simeon Hein. We're talking Bigfoot tonight. And Simeon, right before the break, you mentioned ball lightning. One of the most elusive things. Now, we've seen it in woodcuts. We've seen it in illustrations. This isn't a new phenomenon. It's been witnessed. But scientifically, that's almost paranormal. That's like fringe science when you get into this. Help me understand, what is ball lightning?
Ball lightning is a state of matter beyond ordinary states of matter. We're all familiar with the ordinary states of matter, solid, liquid, gases, right? And we're familiar with plasmas, which are electrically charged gases, which are the most common form of matter in the universe. Plasmas, lightning, aurora borealis,
Right.
Fluorescent bulbs, little sparks that you see here and there. But there's another state of matter beyond plasmas, and that is self-organized plasmas, coherent matter. And what ball lightning appears to be is a type of matter where all the particles have given up their individual identity and are at the same frequency and the same temperature. So they're able to maintain a type of macroscopic quantum coherent behavior. And when they do that, they're able to access types of physical properties that ordinary matter can't access. They're extremely compressed. They can transmute elements. Ball lightning, for the most part, is at room temperature. So even though it's at room temperature, it can melt metals, or at least turn metals into a type of putty when it's seen to go through like a window frame, an aluminum window frame or something like this. And so ball lightning, Jimmy, is something that we, as you mentioned, it's been in woodcuts. It's been seen for as long as we've been around here. It is the product of thunderstorms, but it can exist on its own beyond thunderstorms. Anytime you get a type of compressed matter, whether it's through sonic compression or physical compression, like you get in plate tectonics of earthquakes, where you get so-called earth lights, or in laboratories when you find ways of compressing matter and getting it to resonate, you can create this quantum coherent matter, which it has its own types of physics, and people, Ken Shoulders, who is a colleague of Hal Puthoff, spent a lot of time studying microball lightning after he was developing electronics for the NSA at Stanford Research Institute in the 1960s in classified research that became the basis of the electronics that we all use nowadays, masking techniques for microelectronics. When he looked at his, electronics experiments under electron microscopes, he saw microball lightning. So what we now believe is that this type of phenomena exists at a micro scale or at the largest scale of the universe. It even exists in things possibly like tornadoes, which gives them this very strong type of force that we don't normally see in thermodynamics and vacuums and so forth. So it's a very interesting state of matter. When we see it, it can be ionizing the air, which is why it glows. But here's the thing about ball lightning, Jimmy. All the researchers who've studied this, and there's been a ton of Russian research into this topic, much more than in the US since Nikola Tesla started looking into this, and others even before him, who unfortunately World War I came along. A lot of those ball lightning researchers were killed on the front lines in World War I. So we think of Tesla being associated with it mostly. But a lot of these researchers say that it has a black mode, a stealth mode. Even John Ramirez, the former CIA missiles signal analyst who's been on many podcasts and shows, said that they saw these objects in the atmosphere that they described as stealth plasma, which would be a type of orb or very similar to ball lightning. So it takes a lot of different forms, but it has a visible form and an invisible form. And the main thing that we need to understand about orbs and ball lightning, researchers like Ken Shoulders have talked about this, they exist in their own reality, just like the topics we were talking about before the break. They're in a different type of space-time. They literally change space-time. And this is why reports of ball lightning, if you look 100 years ago, 200 years ago, Francois Arago in France or Walter Brand in Germany, 1920s, who've written about ball lightning, they said it could transport animals and people. We're not talking about ordinary physics here. We're talking about something that can modify space-time and gravity, which is why it's been such a subject of classified government research. I should just say the Air Force, the latest Air Force study of ball lightning, done by none other than the Eric Davis we know from the Wilson Davis memos.
Yeah.
He authored this ball lightning report for the Air Force. And if you read through it, more than half of it is redacted. It's just whited out. Stanton Friedman used to joke about they don't black things out anymore. They white it out. It's all right. Whited out. Why would you have redacted pages about ball lightning if it's just a natural phenomenon, if it doesn't have some technological application?
Are you suggesting a new state of matter, almost like dark matter? I mean, dark matter is called dark matter because it doesn't emit light, right? So that's why it's called dark.
Very important point, Jimmy. And that's why I'm just a little moment of self-promotion. That's why my latest book is called Dark Matter Monsters, because the ball lightning researchers realized that the condensed type of coherent matter you have in ball lightning and orbs, and even microscopic ball lightning that people like Takeaki, the Japanese researcher, wrote about, they all came to the same conclusion, is that you create a type of magnetism that Paul Dirac, again, we mentioned earlier, called magnetic monopoles. Magnetism without a north and a south, just pure magnetism, kind of like electricity. You can like turn up the knob on electricity. We've never figured out a way to do that with magnetism because it has to have a north and a south pole. But magnetic monopoles are just magnetism with no north or south. Coherent matter generates magnetic monopoles. And which is what Paul Dirac speculated had to exist based on quantum mechanics way back in the 1920s. And now we've seen evidence for it. Science Magazine, which I read all the time, has reported evidence for magnetic monopoles. Magnetic monopoles interact with dark matter. And anything that interacts with dark matter is going to have a whole different set of properties than we're used to in ordinary matter. It's going to have these abilities for transmutation, invisibility. This is why we suspect so much of the Air Force report on ball lightning was redacted. It gets into these areas that have all sorts of military applications. But dark matter, since you brought it up, it's a material that scientists say have to exist based on the behavior of galaxies and the way light moves and the cosmic background radiation through the universe to get to us. It outnumbers ordinary matter by like 9 particles to 1.
Yeah.
And it's not just out there. It's right here with us. So if you can create structures that organize dark matter because it doesn't interact with us, it's hard to detect. Let everyone know. It's not easy to detect dark matter. It doesn't interact with us electromagnetically, but it has a gravitational force. But if you can organize it into vortices and spirals with coherent matter, magnetic monopoles, and so forth. And I know this is a lot to swallow, but this is what the research shows for decades of Russian research and other researchers. You have very potent types of matter that can reorganize space, time, and gravity.
Now, there have been lots of reports of not only Bigfoot stepping out of an orb, and you're right about that, apparently they were transportation methods.
Right.
I've also heard reports of balls of energy rolling up a street and witnesses going out and looking at it. And there's a being on the inside of it, like cruising, ET, whatever it may be, rolling up the street, but it's a ball of energy. Is that what we're talking about here?
It's what we're talking about. I talked to some witnesses over in the UK that were on a place called Silbury Hill, which is right in the middle of crop circle country there. And they were just up there camping one night where they said, this sounds so much like the Bigfoot encounters. It got extraordinarily dark and a weird, creepy feeling came over them. And they felt like they should leave, but they're already at the top of this hill. It's not so easy to get down from there to the parking lot. And they said these orbs came across the field. By the way, these were witnessed by other people who didn't know these folks, Paul and Sonia, at the top of Silver Hill at the time. I've heard them lecture separately about this event. They saw these orbs come down, and they said within each of these, they saw a being sitting inside the orb in a lotus position. I mean, even when I heard this, Jimmy, it was like, this is like hard to understand or accept. But if you know that ball lightning orbs have a different type of physics going on within them, they have these properties that we associate with UFOs, with cryptids, and other types of phenomena that it seems all to make sense.
I know a cop, and he was on patrol with his partner about 30, 40 years ago in the 70s. They're on patrol, Pacific Northwest, coastal town. I don't want to get into specifics, but he's told this story on this show, and I know him pretty well. Anyway, he said they were on patrol at night, and foot patrol. They had just parked their car, and across the street, Main Street, on the between the first and second floor of the building across the street, a ball of energy was rolling up the ledge of the first story, right between the first and second story, and it was about 3 feet in diameter, right? And it's a ball of light. And they stopped and they looked. They're like, what is that? And he said, dude, there was an alien inside of it. And we just stood there and watched it roll up this building and turn the corner. It's exactly like not only what we've heard from in the past, which is mythology and folklore and urban legend, about ball lightning. But here we have this, and I've heard this kind of story over and over again. And I often wonder if it is just something very convenient that others understand about nature and physics that we don't have a grasp of yet.
We don't have a grasp of it because something in our educational system and the organizations you and I grew up around didn't want us to know about this. We weren't taught about this in school. But if you look at Nikola Tesla's writings and everyone since him, Winston Bostic was a government researcher working for DOE, finding peaceful uses of fusion power after World War II. Right? They wanted to turn, hydrogen bomb into something useful, like a type of propulsion or something. He concluded the same came to the same conclusions that we're talking about here, that these are self-organized types of plasmas. You could have them in galaxies at the largest scale. You could have them in test tubes. Even the New York Times wrote an article about his discoveries. And this is going back all the way to the 1950s. But I didn't hear about this until a few years ago. I mean, these are people that really could have made a deep scientific contribution if their research hadn't been funded by classified agencies. This is the issue we're dealing with here, at least in the United States. So much of the really good science was relegated to special access programs. And I know you've heard this, anyone in the UFO field, we've heard this over and over again. But this is what happened is the people that were pursuing the Tesla type research into plasmoids, self-organized matter, with all of its weird space-time bending effects that goes into the cryptid world as well. All of that was part of research coming from the Air Force, for the most part in Department of Energy. And they wanted it to be something that they kept control of. So it was always, you read these articles, even Winston Bostic says funded by US Air Force. And then you look at their most recent research into the same area, it's all redacted. You have to come to the conclusion that this Nikola Tesla type self-organized matter based on vibration, frequency, and sound that can generate really interesting gravitational and space-time effects, which is what the witnesses report. They say they're seeing. Somehow all of that got relegated to classified research, and it didn't make it into the type of education that you and I know about. But there's so many people, we could sit here all night and talk about these researchers, whether Japan, Russian, or American researchers, that all they call these objects different names. Some of the people called it vortons, and Matsumoto in Japan called them itonic clusters. But they all came to the same conclusion that some of dark matter, we don't know what it all is, but some of the neutrinos, these dark neutrinos. By the way, Boyd Bushman, you remember him from Lockheed? He talked about neutrino universe, this alternate universe of neutrinos. And again, that was part of Lockheed Martin's research. If it's good enough for the defense contractors, I would say we're not talking about fringe science anymore. That's a convenient label to try to discredit it, while at the same time, the powers that be are developing into these classified patents and so forth. So this is a huge area of science that I think we're coming to understand again. And it just shows us that we actually do understand it. I'm just challenging you a little bit on that statement, but not the public science. That is right. I'm just down the hill from Condon, where the Condon report, I'm down the hill from CU, where the Condon report was assembled. And he said that before they started, he was just going to whitewash. He told the people working with him, we're just going to discredit it, but we want to make it appear like a valid scientific study. And yet Condon himself had lost his security clearance because of his interest in quantum tunneling, which in the 50s was associated with subversive science.
Yes.
I mean, I think science was so politicized since World War II and this fear of communism that anyone associated with quantum mechanics and other types of new physics had to really watch that they weren't blacklisted. Even Condon, who we know from the Condon report, probably did this to get his security clearance back.
Yeah, he was bought and paid for it.
And paid for it.
Yeah, no question about it. By the way, Boulder and the university there, beautiful, man, beautiful. I spend a lot of time there.
And it's a great dog town, great place for dogs.
He keeps looking up at you. I'm watching him. You can't see. He looks up at you.
Checking up on us, yes.
He just plops right back down. He's not. He's not
doing good so far. He could be causing quite a racket, but so far, I think he must enjoy this conversation. It's causing him.
Astro. Nah, he's out. He's out. Okay, but here's another interesting aspect to all of this. One is OSAP. So I'm going to swing back to that because that's exactly what we're talking about here. But there has been lots of conversation about balls that looked like they had lightning in them underneath craft that appeared to, have a gravitational, no type of propulsion, but is obviously flying. And if that's what we're talking about here, certainly a new form of matter. Is there a gravitational effect with this as well? That would be something of interest to Lockheed Skunk Works and others?
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. Exactly right. That is what all of these patents talk about. Even the most recent Lockheed Martin patent from 2021, awarded in 2021. Boyd Bushman was talking about this. Even John Archibald Wheeler, a mainstay of American physics, thesis supervisor to Hugh Everett, who comes up with the many worlds interpretation that is still very popular and suggests the idea of multiverses. He created this model of a particle that he called the geon, which was these alternating electric and magnetic charges in a toroidal shape. Toroids are very important in this, by the way. And he said that would produce a gravitational effect in the middle. This is 50 years before Boyd Bushman proposes the same idea. John Archibald Wheeler. People have been coming up with this over and over again, and it's my theory that because it had the implications of creating anti-gravity, that it kept getting filtered into, it's kind of segregated into the classified black world. And they kept this out of science funding from the National Science Foundation, university education. We've all been dumbed down by this. And it's a big drawback of almost the success of the United States since the 50s, is that the bureaucracies that manage the national security state, and we're told they've issued these national security orders over 5,000 times since then to take away people's patents and tell them you can't study this and you can't tell anyone we even visited you to tell you not to talk about this. That sort of process to me has siphoned off all of this technology, at least the thinking about it, into black budget programs. But when you read about it from Winston Bostic and John Archibald Wheeler, who also had very close ties to the defense establishment, it's pretty clear that this whole line of development of coherent matter has been with us the whole time. The most of our information comes from Soviet and Russian scientists, Jimmy, who came to the same conclusion. There's so many of them. Just one of them, Alexander Parkhomov. Now, he worked in classified Soviet aeronautics.
I have that book.
Top-notch research. He also worked in their remote viewing, their classified remote viewing. And what is he saying here? If you create these sort of structures, coherent matter we're talking about, you get this interaction with the relic neutrinos, a component of dark matter. This whole introduction here is about dark matter and how it creates anti-gravitational effect. He talks about small black holes coming into the atmosphere, UFOs. So many of these researchers, even conventional ball lightning researchers, talk about UFOs and how you have this overlap between them that they can't make sense of either. But it all suggests another type of matter. Now, let me tell you one more point of reference here, which confirms what we're all talking about. Dr. Hal Puthoff's presentation to IRVA SSE meeting, joint meeting of IRVA and SSE in Las Vegas in 2018. He tells us that the U.S. government has had classified UFO research since Project Blue Book, that he's been involved in it, and he can't say everything about it, but he tells us that some of the materials that they've recovered from UFO crashes, the so-called bismuth magnesium material, this is the only one he told us about, because I asked him, were there other materials? And he said, I can't talk about it. That was his literal response to me after. So what other besides bismuth magnesium? He looked up for things that I can't talk about it. These materials, do you know what he said they did? They literally bent space and time by modifying permittivity. He showed us how they could act like waveguides to modify the permittivity of free space, which he said is normally by physicists set to 1, like we've been talking about, set everything to an even metric. He said you could have variable permittivity, which would bend space-time. And what is the speed of light based on? Permeability and permittivity. It's a formula. And he showed us the formula and said, well, you start modifying permittivity. This would explain why UFOs are often different colors shifted to blue and seem to look different because they're in a different frame of reference. If you keep pushing that, they eventually go invisible. But in between, they appear blue shifted. And he's the one who talked about variable permittivity. And then it turns out his colleague, Ken Shoulders, they worked together for a number of years in Austin at an establishment they called Jupiter Technologies. He's talking about variable permittivity in ball lightning and orbs and so forth. You realize they're all talking about the same thing. They're talking, and what Puthoff called it, which people are, I'm sure our listeners, viewers are familiar with, space-time metric engineering.
Yep.
The Soviets called it vacuum engineering. It's the same thing, modifying space and time, the quantum field directly with materials that are no longer set to the constants that we're all used to.
Yeah. I'm going to circle back to Wheeler and Everett, by the way, two of my heroes. But I live a mile away from Skunk Works, right? You see my finger? I'm pointing that way. The end of the runway points at the back of my house. Right there. It's right there.
Palmdale.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Palmdale. Everybody knows that. And every time I have visitors over at the house, right? They're from out of town. They don't want to see the bunker. They don't want to see my guitars. Jimmy, man, take us to Skunk Works. That's what they want to go to Skunk Works. And it's just a mile down the road. And I've seen some crazy stuff. And I'm convinced from, without going into details, but there's some anti-gravity research going on. I don't want to say any more than that. I live here. I don't want to get in trouble with my neighbors who all work, down the street. But I'm convinced of that. And now back to two of my heroes. I've got a lot of hero physicists. I do. The list is long. But Everett and Wheeler thought outside of the box. And their students and those physicists today that go back and review Wheeler's and Everett's work and statements allowed free thinking in the 50s and 60s like we never had before in physics. But it stopped. It seems like the physics world now, in this era of funding, right? That we're talking about, it's gotten so narrow that they don't want to rock the boat. Wheeler was a boat rocker, man. I mean, Everett, are you kidding me? Right? And they don't think that way anymore. What do you think happened? Why did it get closed down so quickly?
I think everyone got bought off.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it, but having gone through academics, having worked at a university, there are these intense pressures to toe the line. And you get these lectures I got them from my professors. You do want to be successful in this field, don't you? You do want to get promoted. You want tenure. This goes into people's minds, no matter what organization you work in. And we're threatened with a type of economic blackmail in this country that if you don't toe the line, you're going to be booted out the door and be on your own. You could fall through the economic cracks, right?
Yeah.
And what we suffered from is something that Europe was actually better at than we were in the US, which was engaging the theory behind this a little more. Something that Einstein was highly concerned with is that physics shouldn't be just about predicting what's going to happen in physics experiments. It should give us an explanation for how the universe works in a way that seems intuitively to make sense with the world we see around us. But quantum mechanics and modern physics went in another direction, which was basically shut up and calculate, which was you don't need to know what a superposition is of particles or why matter can seem like a particle or a wave. All we need to know is that your experiment works out the way we expect it to work out, so we can develop atomic bombs or quantum computers or whatever technology you're working. But we don't need to know why it works. And I think that's what we're missing here. And here's what the universe keeps telling us. It keeps throwing UFOs at us. Bigfoot, cryptid encounters, ghosts, haunted sites, RV premonitions. telepathic experiences, things that don't fit within that model, because it's saying to us, look, you're in a bigger reality, and those models in and of themselves are not sufficient to explain what we're seeing around us. You need to kind of apply it. It's the contradiction. It's the paradox of success, is that once you're riding the gravy train, for a lot of people that are on those career paths, the farther you go on to that path, whatever organization or whatever you do within your profession, you're less and less likely to want to take risks.
Yeah, you don't take chances. You just don't do it.
Yeah, and it was Geddy Lee of Rush. Remember what he said? He said he always maintained this moral position. I'd never want to do anything that went against my morals as an 18-year-old, the person I was as an 18-year-old. I never wanted to do anything that would offend the person I had been when I was 18. And I think a lot of us, as we go through these different sort of institutions, you come under these pressures to play the game, to fit the mold. And that has a negative effect on creative new thinking. It's exactly what you said a few minutes ago. The funding got so powerful after World War II from all these government organizations coming together to fight World War II, which we all agree was necessary at the time. It had to happen, but they never came apart at the end. That national security state never separated, and you got all this compartmentalization. What the insiders, at To the Stars Academy called stovepiping, those guys all talked about it. Those folks that worked with Tom DeLonge in his TTSA group. It's a stovepiping that doesn't allow people to talk to other people in the area because they're under these kind of NDAs, security agreements. I can't tell you how many people I've come across when I attempt to get them to elaborate on the mysterious materials they've been asked to reverse engineer. And you know what their response often is? Even in private industry, I signed an NDA with the federal government. I can't talk anymore about this. We never had this conversation.
Yeah, and they don't know where the materials came from, and they don't know, who the, what the dude or dudette in the next lab is working on,
right?
Or
you can't talk to the guy in the next lab.
No, you can't do it. And
it's a chilling effect.
And back to your point, if we go back to Everett and Wheeler and Feynman, what a great era, and Bohr, right? And those guys would get together and argue and fight. And dude, but they talked it out, and they explored ideas. And what do we get out of that? Well, we got things like crazy stuff: multi-world, multiverse, parallel worlds, entanglement, right? And these concepts that today are exactly what our paranormal, supernatural world has been discussing: remote viewing, right?
Exactly.
Telepathy, all consciousness, right? It boggles. Yes.
This is why Parkhomov talks about cold fusion, what's now called low energy nuclear reaction, with the same book about remote viewing, because it's all the same thing, just like you're saying.
Would you equate? See, this is the thing. Physicists want the world to understand entanglement, the multiverse, right? String theory. They want all of these crazy science fiction, right, concepts that works elegantly in the math, right? It plays out and the math works. Therefore, they describe those algorithms to us and paint the picture of what they're talking about. But they don't want to discuss consciousness, and they don't want to discuss ghosts, and they don't want to discuss remote viewing or telepathy or UFOs, or it's bizarre, but they're telling us the exact same thing.
Right, they are. And this is exactly the argument that Hugh Everett made back in the 1950s when he was working with Wheeler and other physicists. He argued that quantum mechanics just doesn't apply only to microscopic world. Isn't that what we always hear about quantum mechanics? They almost define it. The definition of quantum mechanics is how the subatomic world works. Right. Well, Hugh Everett said, why is there this artificial cutoff between the micro and the macro? Quantum mechanics has to describe the macro world too. There's nothing that just says, well, as soon as you get larger than atoms, quantum mechanics doesn't apply. There's nothing in the theory that should explain why that's true. There's no reason for the Heisenberg cut, as it's called. There's some magical area where it stops working. Why? Hugh Everett said a Schrodinger wave function has to apply to macroscopic objects. Now, the way I understand that, that's exactly what you're talking about with remote viewing and telepathy, this kind of larger scale entanglement and resonance, which is really what quantum mechanics is. Without that type of resonance, we wouldn't even have this conversation right now, because all the electronics we're using right now is based on quantum tunneling. If quantum mechanics didn't work, this wouldn't be happening. But it's happening at the macroscopic scale too, and it's what we call paranormal phenomena.
It's phenomenal to me to have a physicist look you straight in the eye and say, well, if you observe something, you can change its state. You only got to look at it, right? You want to tell me that, but you've got issues with spirituality, right? You've got issues with consciousness. What are you really trying to say here? Schrodinger, you get into these concepts that are so far out there, but they'll say, well, yeah, but the math checks out. But I don't want to discuss consciousness. I can't measure it.
Yeah, they want to cut it off at the microscopic subatomic level, but they'll say it doesn't apply to our scale. And yet we've all this evidence from all the witnesses of these different phenomena we've been talking about who've experienced this, whether it be from remote viewing or crop circles, another topic that I've spent a lot of time looking at. And by the way, we found the same phenomena around crop circles. People had telepathic experiences, premonitions of crop circles that wouldn't appear for a couple of days, but yet they drew them perfectly in a notebook a few days before. The orbs, time loss, weird magnetic effects, compasses spinning around, similar sorts of phenomena. Jimmy, even the ones we made experimentally where we paid the farmer, we would get some of these strange effects, which, again, is sort of a vortices, vortex, dark matter type of interaction. At least that's the way I look at it. But here's how I think this applies to cryptids, since this is what we were originally talking about.
Yeah, well, what were we talking about? Oh, Bigfoot.
The reason why Bigfoot is so associated with all of these topics we're talking about tonight is, in my view, they're a type of human or related to humans, a type of hominoid, as the Russian researchers, the Russians called it hominology, that kept developing along these lines without the classification and the stovepiping and the type of bureaucratization, which for some reason our particular species went in that direction. Technological direction. They kept in the other direction of the way nature already develops all these quantum principles. And they just kept developing it over millennia, until they were capable of doing everything we see in that Lockheed Martin patent, or what Boyd Bushman is talking about. Invisibility, cloaking, non-local communication. Everything you see in those patents is what cryptids are capable of doing. Morphine, transmutation, a lot of them. So it just seems to me, if we think we're figuring it out now, it's probably just like these very interesting animals we were talking about at the beginning of the show that are naturally invisible. Some other types of life that is evolved at us as we are thousands of years ago, they just went in a different direction, and they're here with us now, like another civilization layered onto ours, but they're extremely good at being stealthy and avoiding us if they want, and changing into other frequencies, which we don't consciously know how to do.
Are you technically, I'm not putting you on the spot here, but I want to hear your answer. Are we technically talking about Skinwalker Ranch?
Yeah.
And the entire concept of OSAP, which to me had nothing to do with UFOs,
right,
and had everything to do with everything else, cryptids and the spirit world and vortexes, right?
Yeah. Why people like Stephen Greenstreet continue to make fun of this when there's so many witnesses, not only to Skinwalker Ranch, I'm talking about the New York Post, the reporter who did some very good UFO research a few years ago, but now has become very critical of OSAP. And this is what OSAP was looking at. People like James Lukatsky and Colin Keller and George Knapp realized there was a huge crossover between the UFO phenomena and the phenomena they saw at Skinwalker Ranch, which at the time was owned by Robert Bigelow. And they started OSAP as a UFO program, but then they realized places where these UFOs show up, like Skinwalker Ranch, also had cryptid activity and lots of orbs, of course, and things that appear like ball lightning, and people experiencing time slips and voices speaking in their heads, the same sort of thing. But this is not only happening at Skinwalker Ranch. Ted Phillips, who was an associate of J. Allen Hynek, did a lot of trace case analyses, thousands of cases, documented the same phenomena at a place called Marley Woods, a ranch in Missouri. Identical phenomena to Skinwalker. Some people said even more so. Strange types of animals that we just don't even have names for, call them cryptids. The orbs, Ted Phillips called them the ambers. He even said one time one of these orbs came over a picnic bench there that was chained to the ground and started coming up into the air, the anti-gravity effects. So you get this at these portal areas. There are some near the Yakima, Washington area, Elbert County.
Bradshaw Ranch in Sedona.
Right. So we know about these portal areas, and they most likely, in my view, have some sort of different mineral or crystalline configuration in the ground that gives rise to these phenomena. That makes it easier for coherent matter phenomena to arise. And different types of carbonaceous and silica substances that form the basis of ball lightning are most likely, we know in Skinwalker Ranch there's a lot of gilsonite, which is a carbon-based material. And there could be more going on than that. But it seems like you get this in certain places. But don't you think there's a pretty big overlap between all these different sort of portal areas, the cryptids, the UFOs, the orbs, and then the experiences of the people who are there, which is a lot of really strange phenomena. The Skinwalker Ranch area is interesting because even before the modern era, the American Indians who lived in the area reported these types of cryptids, types of strange phenomena in that whole Uinta County basin. So it seems that these are long-lasting effects, and it would make sense that OSAP was interested in this. I mean, just at a minimal level, for the same reason we've been talking about all this sort of defense contractor interest in ball lightning and so forth, because there's technological applications if you can figure it out.
In the short time that we have left, I've got to ask you the most complicated question, in the known universe, which is this: consciousness. Does it exist in the physical, or is it outside the physical?
Well, it's a good question. And I don't think anyone has the complete answer to that. But to me, it seems, based on what we know about sound and frequency, is that consciousness and intelligence generates matter, but that our particular biological form, we're only aware of a sliver of it at a time, so that it exists at a lot of different levels. And it's not as contained in physical matter like we appear to be in this, definite space over a certain time period. So it has this sort of non-local quality to it, which is also another component of these phenomena. Because if you look at people who've had near-death experiences, and is a whole nother topic, the people who've, you talk to people that were heart surgeons who had patients die on the operating table and come back. Those patients just knew way too much about what had been going on the whole time and described what the outside of the building looked like. I remember hearing cases of people who are clinically dead who could describe the inside of the elevator shafts and things that there's no way they could have known about. They had like remote viewing experiences while they were clinically dead. So what that shows us is, to me at least, that the conscious component of what we are, goes beyond the physical.
And why Why is it so easy for science today to go the easy route and to say that consciousness is just a chemical reaction, right? That it's in every single particle. There's a little piece of consciousness. You get enough mass together, this 5 pounds of gray goo between our ears, and consciousness is just a product of that. Is that just the easy way out because they can't measure it, and therefore they can't understand it? I mean, everybody knows, every physicist knows that they can laugh and cry and think and talk. They know that consciousness is a thing, but they don't want to discuss it.
Yeah, we come from this mechanistic scientific paradigm, which we have to respect because it was going up against a lot of superstitious and just dogmatic religious beliefs of the Middle Ages. I mean, at the time, they wanted to, basically take anybody who believed in the heliocentric theory versus the Ptolemaic idea, and burn you at the stake, which they did to Giordano Bruno.
Yes, they did.
Who just was the first person to propose multiverses in the sense of he proposed the infinite universe. He suggested other life forms on other planets. So science had to challenge that, and I think we can identify it because all of modern people are evidence-based. We actually like to see some, no matter where you come down on any of the topics we're talking about tonight, we can all agree that we'd like to see evidence one way or another, and we're willing to go with the evidence. Whether it's the arrow type evidence, we don't think that's the full range of evidence, but we're evidence-based people. Now, consciousness is a little hard to fit into an evidence-based paradigm. And that's our sort of bias as modern people, because before the modern era, if you read books in the history of science, people were not evidence-based. It either had to be something that Aristotle said or the church believed in. And if the evidence didn't fit that, they said your eyes were deceiving you because it didn't fit what they were. Totally belief-based. We've switched around the other way in the last 500 years to be evidence-based, which biases us more towards material stuff and things that we can measure. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but it also means that phenomena, even RV comes down into this category. It's a little hard to kind of identify what is going on there. You can look at the page later and see what people wrote down, but you don't know how they got it. But going along your argument a little more, there's so much about us that doesn't fit into the reductionist model of the brain. And even in Science magazine, which I like to read on a weekly basis, there are articles arguing that the reductionist approach to the brain and consciousness doesn't add up. Even the inventor of the microchip, Federico Fagin, and there's a free documentary you can watch about the 4 lives of Federico Fagin. He argues in there that consciousness is not something that is easily reducible to something mechanistic. He argues machines will never be conscious, at least machines as we understand them. The consciousness has something to do with experience and understanding and feelings, which machines don't have directly. So it's a very good question. And I think just the way we look at it, it's hard to, we like the idea of reductions and to break things down into parts, but it simply doesn't work in the case of who we are. It remains a mystery.
And the big brain experiment, it's still ongoing in Switzerland. The idea, it sounds plausible. If we build a computer big enough with 1 trillion connections, just like the human brain, it'll work, right? So they built it, and it's impressive. Didn't do nothing, right? And it was just like, wait a minute. I guess the brain is actually pretty cool. And in the end, and I'm paraphrasing all of this, but in the end, the billions of dollars that they spent and continue to spend on that project, the magic that they thought was going to happen, possible sentience, right? And all of this, maybe the consciousness could develop, and thought patterns and things. None of that happened. It was just an oversized computer. The brain works in magical ways, and you're right. The reductionist part, they've tried, and I think that the more that we study the brain, the more that we understand that it's probably the most amazing creation in the universe.
Yeah, it's more than just the sum of the parts, even with trillions of synaptic connections, which seem to be more, if you take all the neurons we have and all the multiples of connections, apparently it's more than stars in the universe. It's just a huge amount of connections. But even if you add all that up, it's not just this quantitative sort of additive thing. There's something more to it than that we can't get at. And not all cultures believe that we're based in our brains. I spent some time teaching remote viewing in Japan, and the Japanese believe that the center of our being is in our stomachs, kind of our midsection, not in our physical brain. So even that is just a certain cultural idea. But I don't think that paradigm is ever going to explain what's going on here. And that reductionist paradigm is just too limited. Quantum mechanics in and of itself sort of disassembles the reductionist paradigm, because it creates this idea of quantum entanglement, which is not reducible to its parts. It's some sort of kind of long-range distribution that you get from particles that does not reduce to any particular part. It's more of a field effect. And this is why it can't really be reduced. But I think we're still, we brought up around this mechanistic idea. This was popular in medicine for a while. That we're just we know we're more than the sum of our parts.
Yeah,
So,
and well, with speaking of entanglement, I mean that's at the speed of now, right? Not the speed of light, right? We're talking about at the same time. Is that the magic behind remote viewing? Because remote viewing's not at the speed of light either. It's at the speed of thought. It's at the speed of now. Is entanglement, is that what is going on, that you're finding a way to entangle particles and at great distances, but see those in real time?
Well, this is something that's a subject of great debate.
Yeah.
Is quantum entanglement responsible for these non-local effects? And RV is one of these, as you are aware.
I think telepathy is entanglement. Yeah.
Telepathy and this is the weird thing about it, that anyone who's encountered this, it's a real mind bender. The fact that you can remote view things that haven't happened yet and it can be accurate, as if it already exists out there in space-time, but it's not here physically yet. But your RV mind picked up something that's not going to happen until tomorrow or a few days later or a week later. And people have done experiments with this, just using binary outcomes where they convert the outcomes of markets over like 10 years. Greg Kolodziejczyk, a Canadian extreme distance athlete, endurance athlete, did his own test for 13 years and was able to get predictions of stock market type financial, binary outcomes up or down, about 65-70% accuracy over 5,000 trials. There's no way you're going to do that unless there's a real effect there. You can't reproduce that over 13 years unless it would just look like 50-50 after 13 years, believe me, talking as a statistician. But the quantum entanglement idea does not suggest that you were exchanging information at a distance. It just says that particles that are entangled, if one is spin the other way, the other has to spin the opposite. If you know this one's up, the other one has to be down. It doesn't say they can communicate in real time. So I think it's more likely, even though quantum entanglement is literally holding all of this together right now, it doesn't say that there is a sort of communication at a distance. Personally, what I think is more likely going on is, I go back to the dark matter explanation. We're interacting with flows of matter that we can't see, but that have, they have like webs throughout the entire cosmos, through our universe, and probably into the multiverse. This sort of fractal web of dark matter, like these strings of matter, and they're communicating all the time. And this is why I think you can relate RV to PK. I saw demonstrations of this when I was in Japan a number of years ago, of people that could levitate objects over their hand. In one case, this particular practitioner levitated a cigarette into my shirt pocket from 15 feet away, and that cigarette went in with force. It made a right angle turn it was like a torpedo coming at me. What is this? There has to be a wire, something. No, I still have the cigarette. It made a right angle turn, and this guy was staring at it, and it went right into the shirt pocket. Boom. You could feel it go in, and he's 15 feet away. PK is real. And I know this because our Defense Department, Pentagon, was studying Soviet PK experiments in the 70s. And I can tell you for a fact, because I've been told this by people that were in the room at the time, they were monitoring Soviet PK experiments where Soviet PK practitioners could bend a spoon 1,000 miles away from Moscow. And the spoon bent on command. It literally bent from a sender 1,000 miles distant from the spoon. I think PK and RV are related because, just like Parkhomov argues, there are dark matter effects. So my personal bent is more towards these relic neutrinos. They're cold neutrinos when they emit them. And I think, going back to coherent matter, someone that could emit coherent matter in a directed way would be levitating and pushing objects around, since dark matter is a gravitationally based type of force. So I go more in that direction, Jimmy, than in the quantum entanglement view, just because physicists tell us, and I was just reading about it earlier today from a guy named Anton Zellinger, who happened to win the Nobel Prize last year for this quantum entanglement. And he's arguing you can do quantum teleportation, but not directly with two particles. You have to involve a third particle. And there's sort of a complex way they do it.
Yeah, I read that.
You know about this. So I go more in the direction of dark matter than quantum. I have a video on my YouTube channel where I argue it's more, probably, no one knows for sure, more of a dark matter effect than a quantum entanglement effect.
Well, didn't the Chinese, man, we're out of time. I could do this. We could talk for the next, I can't wait to get you back. Didn't the Chinese twice over the last year change the state of particles and prove entanglement from satellite to satellite? Right?
Yeah.
Right? So
there is probably a way to do it. The Zellinger way and other ways of using the principle to create something at a distance. I've talked in Boulder to people that were working with quantum computers up at NIST, National Institute for Standards.
Yeah,
I've asked them this question, Jimmy, and they said without quantum entanglement, you wouldn't have quantum computers. So there must be a way that.
Yeah.
So they were arguing the opposite of this standard view. They said they have to be exchanging information, or you wouldn't have even the idea of a quantum computer, which now we know exists at least for a few, fractions of a second at a time.
Yeah, it's the whole idea. You see, this is the part where I keep going back to a Sean Carroll or some atheist physicist guy that will tell you how a qubit works, right? That you've got a 0, 1 and a both, and the both, that qubit is entangled in a parallel world with a particle interact, and it's that computational power, right? And I'm like, wait a minute. You're telling me some Star Trek science fiction, I'm going to say a bad, bullshit, which I believe is real. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you're going to feed me that, but you don't believe in ghosts? Right? This is like, wait.
Exactly.
You can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways.
Thank you. You made my day. It's exactly what I said. You're going to tell me all this spooky stuff's going on in quantum entanglement and groups of particles. And David Deutsch, a colleague of Sean Carroll,
yes,
argues that quantum computing proves the existence of a Hugh Everett multiverse. Mm-hmm. This is what Deutsch argues, is that when the computer is doing its thing, it's in a superposition of all possible worlds, and then sort of comes down into our world with one solution. And yet those very same people, the David Deutsches and Sean Carroll in particular, if you've looked at his tweets, argue, no, there's no telepathy, there's no RV, there's no ghosts, there's no UFOs, get over it. How could you argue we're going to multiverses with your freaking quantum computers and Hugh Everett branching structure? But there's none of these phenomena that thousands and thousands of people have experienced, and they've told you about it and they've told me about it. It doesn't make sense. That's where those people are completely unscientific and illogical.
Yeah, completely. And, I've read all of Sean Carroll's books. right? I listen to all of his lectures. I love his podcast and things. But man, I don't think he has any clue how quickly I'll tune out when he goes in that direction. It's weird because I love his stuff. His explanation of time, it's dude, it's some of the best. Some of the best. And then he'll go, well, he does an AMA once a month. It's a 3-hour show. I love it, right? And he goes through and he's reading the questions, and he'll do it, man. Once a month, somebody will go, okay, man, but what about ghosts? What about consciousness, right? And Carol goes, I don't have time for things that aren't real. It's like, dude.
Has you bothered to look at the evidence? Decades of RV experiments that are statistically significant to the nth point. It's data.
You know who the most spiritual person in the world is? Sean Carroll, when that plane is going down. I guarantee you, man. I guarantee it. He'd be the most spiritual mofo.
Sudden conversion.
Yeah.
I have the exact same reaction you two do. He's one of the brightest guys we have around, so good at explaining all of this, and goes off into parallel realities, explains to us why it makes sense, why it's a simpler interpretation of quantum mechanics, and then he veers off when someone asks him about this. He said, no, that's just fiction.
I don't have time for that stuff.
You don't have
Simeon, a brilliant conversation tonight, and I look forward to having you on again very, very soon. Where can everybody get your books? You've got how many out now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yes, Dark Matter Monsters, Black Swan Ghosts. And don't forget Opening Minds. Yeah, you can get them all at my website, newcrystalmind.com. I love to send people signed copies. That's a real thrill for me. But of course, you can get them through Amazon if you just, if you want to get it the usual way. But go to my website, newcrystalmind.com. I've got a pinned post at the top for listeners to get signed copies from me directly.
Okay, give me. I'm gonna post it right now. It's what?
newcrystalmind.com. newcrystalmind.com.
See, I can post links in the chat. What a great conversation. I look forward to the next one. Brilliant on every level. Thank you so much, Simeon, and enjoy the rest of your night. And Astro, I think it now knows the show is over. He just looked up. I'll talk to you, Simeon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jimmy. Talk to you next time.
Great show. Perfect show. Thank you so much. Dr. Simeon Hein, again, mountbaldy.com and newcrystalmind.com. I've got the links up. They're up in social media, and they're also over on our website. Wow, what an amazing show tonight. That was perfect. I got everything in that I love to talk about. You guys know I was in my element tonight. What a great show. What a long day. I've been broadcasting since 7 a.m. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you to Dennis and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy. SpaceboyMusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2023 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Until tomorrow night, I want everybody to be safe. Go back, Lee Tappy.